you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join doctors Joanne and Aaron as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
We spend our days caring for everyone else, our patients, families, teams. But when was the last time we extended that same care and grace to ourselves? And that is what we will be talking about in this episode. We will be talking about grace. And you might be thinking, what's grace? And that's where we're going to start. And I'm here with my super co-host, Dr. Erin Hurley. And I want to start with just that question, Erin. How would you define grace? And let's even think of about some examples that we can share.
Well, I did a little bit of digging, so I'm going to share one of the definitions of grace that I found very profound and meaningful. And grace in medicine can be the practice of offering understanding to ourselves, our colleagues, and our patients when things aren't perfect, when time runs short, or emotions run high. And it's how we stay human in a system that often forgets that we are. And that, oftentimes I compare medicine oftentimes treats us like we're a robot. And there's human behavior behind every medical interaction, and that perfectionism that we often come into medicine with. And when we can let that go, whether that's letting go of the perfect note, the perfect interaction, the perfect staying on time, and be okay with it not being perfect. And I love one of the terms you've used, Joanne, is that precision. We are never recommending a physician or healthcare provider not be precise or not aim for the highest quality possible. Yet when that perfection piece comes in, there's no grace with that. And that's oftentimes when we can be very hard on ourselves, hard on the system, hard on our patients when things aren't going just right. And it can be hard to remember that piece because that's not something, I don't know, were you ever taught about how to have grace and understanding in medicine? I don't think that was highlighted as much as, getting everything just right.
Yes, and I believe that's even part of the problem, that we're programmed to just go and deal with it and be resilient beyond what you can, and just right, like that mentality of no pain, no gain, which I see the benefit to that phrase, but then also where it doesn't then give us space for that grace. And the other word that I like to think of in thinking about definitions is compassion. Like that resonates a little bit more with me too, because I think of compassion as like that pause before the reaction or before the judgment. Is that ability also to take that breath that lets us think about it and reframe what we're telling ourselves instead of beating ourselves up, or that judgment that you were talking about.
And I think that's our automatic, as you were talking about that beating ourselves up. And one example I like to use is when I'm working with, especially a new client, like a new coaching client, and they're a few minutes late for our session, or they had an emergency and they need to move the session, and they apologize profusely. And I say, I choose to work with you. I choose really complex people. Women in medicine, for the most part, are not simple people. You have complicated lives. You have very demanding jobs. And the last thing I want is for you to feel guilty because you were seeing a patient that ran over and you're a few minutes late, or you have to move something because an emergency came up. I completely understand it. I lived it. And when I can role model for them and say, I don't need you to apologize even. Just let me know if you can send a quick text. Hey, I'm going to be a few minutes late, or having respect in the relationship. And you can have great respect in a relationship, allowing grace for yourself and take out the guilt or the apologetic piece, because to me, those aren't always necessary. And when we can do that, think of the less emotional load that we might carry when we can allow ourselves to do that. How about you, Joanne? What's an example where you see grace as a fabulous ingredient? to add to the circumstance?
Oh, goodness. I have been practicing grace quite a bit. I've shared with you all that I am in transition of going from the institution I've been working for 18 years back into private practice. So I decided to take about a month. And I was about to say to take a month off. And that's the thing. It wasn't a month off. It was a month to transition, to get ready, knowing that I'm going to start slow and without full books. And I should be grateful for that. And that I'm going to continue this transition. But I remember, Erin and I were talking about this recently. I remember how often, and maybe some of you can relate, that I would be, if I only had a month off, I would do all these things. And since I made this decision of transitioning, in my mind, I was going to do all these things in this month, right? Like how many of you had that where you have some time off or a break and then, even on a weekend, and you have all these ideas of all these things that you want to do. And I kind of joke with myself that the reminder of Joanne, your hours also have 60 minutes, not 120. And I've had to practice grace in reminding myself like this, there's just so much that you can do. This wasn't a month of vacation. You've been doing a lot of things. I have continued my coaching. I actually was out of town. I had people visit. So many things. And then I look back and unfortunately, or again, with grace, my first response, and I think that this is the message here, kind of honoring that our brain can be judgy and have that because of our programming, give us this initial thought of, oh, you could have done this and you should have done that. All those shoulds that we beat ourselves up with. And again, having with grace, you can pause to say, first of all, are all these thoughts true? Do I want to listen to them? And then reframing them like, yes, I have been busy and I have been doing a lot of things. And guess what? I have slowed down and I've taken time for myself and so many beautiful things. But it's been a practice of grace and compassion almost daily in a very intentional way. How about you, Erin? When was the last time you extended grace for yourself?
Well, if you can tell from my deep voice today, I'm recovering from a cold and I got back from a trip 3 days in Oxford, England at a trauma conference and came back with a cold and jet lag. And even though my daughter was visiting for the first time for maybe 9 months or so, I slept for 15 hours the first day back and just relied on my husband to entertain her. And I will spend plenty of time with her. But if I can do aggressive rest and get over this cold as quickly as possible, I will be able to enjoy my time with her. But that was giving myself grace. And what do I coach my clients on? Aggressive rest. If you're sick, take care of yourself. And I got to reap the rewards of doing that, which was great. This also
I like that
reminds me,
aggressive rest.
yeah, not something that, again, I think we learn about in medicine. And your conversation about your ideas, when you say taking a month off, and I'm thinking, Joanne, you're building a brand new business. And if we were to ask an entrepreneur, how many months can you get a new business built in 4 weeks? And knowing that you were doing some work ahead of time, but is that realistic as opposed to thinking this is a month off and thinking that statement of realistic optimism. So that's not my phrase. I'm borrowing it from one of my clients. And oftentimes when we just have that optimistic lens, it doesn't serve us well. And I can tell when I'm being too optimistic. I use the full focus planner system, and it has, I have a system where I write out what's my priorities, top 3 priorities, what are the to-do list for that day. And then I go through with a highlighter, and my yellow is I did it. My orange highlighter is I didn't do it, and I put it on a future date to get done. And if I see there's way too little yellow, what I completed versus what I put on my task list, that's me being too optimistic and unrealistic. And then I can look at that pattern and say, okay, what can you do so you don't even need to waste time putting too much in your day, and be realistic about what can get done. And sometimes I think when we recognize our limitations as a human being and have understanding in that, it makes it easier to create the schedule, the plan for ourselves that is more doable as a human being, not a robot that doesn't need to recharge like we do.
And that makes me think of when I'm coaching women in medicine and we do goal setting or we're future casting and we have all these ideas, which is great. And then we talk about, okay, what are the needle movers? What are the steps that we need to take to get a little bit closer to the future self? And we come up with this beautiful list. And then it's, okay, now let's pick just one or two things that we're going to focus on, and how difficult it is for us to do that, because it's great that we're so motivated, but then we just want to do all the things. And I'm going to borrow that phrase of realistic optimism. What an amazing reframe. And that makes me think of a good question for us of, why is grace particularly important for women in medicine?
Well, as we've both shared, we are put through a pretty inhumane system. You think about the hours spending, even starting in medical school. I remember, 15-hour days, the long days on call, having to learn to ignore our bodies and our emotions. We can't have emotions if we're in the middle of a code. We can't use the restroom if we're in the middle of, being at a surgery. And so we just learn to ignore so many parts of ourselves. And I know with working with my coach, I learned to lean back into thinking, and I'm like, oh, these are hard questions. I'm digging deep. I'm reflecting. And so we are oftentimes not given time and capacity to dig deep for ourselves. And yet we should, because then that can help give us more understanding, not only for ourselves, but for others. And so when we're go, 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 and we don't pause, we miss a lot of things. And so creating some capacity for ourselves, and like I said, when things don't go perfectly, when you have that grace sprinkled in, that understanding, it helps remove some of the excess baggage that you don't need in your maybe busy, maybe sometimes chaotic, maybe sometimes overwhelming, sometimes overexhausting life. When we can remove guilt, and as Joanne says, judgment, because we didn't meet whatever that goal was, it can actually create more capacity for lightness of being and not feel so heavy. And so when we think, what's the opposite of grace? For me, it's that judgment and lack of understanding, which doesn't feel good when you're on the receiving end of that. And I think that if you are feeling that way, then it's probably affecting your relationships with others, whether it's your partner, your kids, your patients, and also yourself. And what if we can use that word Joanne used, compassion? What if we can have compassion and grace instead? Could that soften the edges, the hard edges, when there's friction? And with so much heaviness in medicine for so many reasons that I'm not even going to start there. Let's just say it's heavy to practice in medicine now. With all of that heaviness, my goal is, what can we do to lighten your load? And some of those things are out of your control, but what's in your control? And when you give yourself compassion and grace and practice it with others, I think that can help you lighten your load.
So true. I think also of what we've discussed so many times in this podcast of how women physicians have higher rates of burnout, depression, how we beat ourselves up, the guilt that you mentioned, and how adding more grace and compassion can really, it won't make things go away, but it can really soften that bad that we use to beat ourselves up. And like you said, then the importance of improving our relationships and connection, because so much healing happens there. I really like that. In my journaling, talking about, how I've been using grace, that's what I've been telling myself. I've just been writing have faith. Everything is moving forward. Keep the momentum going. Literally, I would say, like, you're doing great. And again, like, I've been connecting a lot with have faith. It's okay. No anxiety today. And it's sometimes little phrases like that, the same way that we can tell one of our kids or a good friend, being able to say that to ourselves and connect, particularly because as women in medicine, we're so hardworking. It's our beautiful traits of being so caring and kind and serving, making sure that we save some of the batteries to extend that for ourselves as well. And that's also what I wanted to ask you, Erin. Like, what are some specific tools that we can use to cultivate more grace in our lives? You mentioned a few already, but what are some other things that we can practice?
One of them is seeking to understand, curiosity. And as I shared, I just came back from a 3-day conference in Oxford, England, from world-renowned trauma experts, including Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote this book, The Body Keeps the Score. If you work in medicine or you interact with humans, it can be so helpful because I was sharing about understanding. And this book really highlights that many people, either ourselves, those around us, have been exposed to trauma. And if you work in medicine, chances are you're getting exposed to trauma or secondary trauma. And trauma can create triggers. And so we don't know what other people's triggers are. Sometimes we don't even know what our own triggers are. And so when we are trying to help someone, let's say it's a patient and they're not taking their medication or they're not following the diet that you've recommended and they've got diabetes or something like that, we can either be very critical of them or we can get curious, have grace and understanding, and dig a little deeper to find out what's behind that. And there's not enough time in a brief podcast episode to talk about all the depth, but the more I can understand about the human I'm connecting with across from me, and even if they think and act very differently from me, the more I can get curious and go, oh, I can totally get it, or I think I have an understanding of why they're behaving that way. The weight that's released off my shoulders because I'm no longer judgmental or critical is profound. And how can we create more of that curiosity, and which decreases friction? One is also getting support. What support do you need to have grace for yourself and others? Sometimes I think a lack of grace is merely a lack of energy because you've got a short fuse. You don't have the energy to pause and reflect and think, what's my response supposed to be? You're just in that knee-jerk reaction because you have no capacity for anything else. So really looking at that. And I think for women in medicine, low energy is almost a given. If I'm coaching a new client and I ask them to do a questionnaire, energy is almost always 3 or 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. Which is not ideal, my friends. So looking at what are those factors that might be stealing your grace or your ability to have grace. Another is, and again, this is a topic that was repeated over and over again at this trauma conference, is we need to move our bodies. If we are storing up stress and cortisol and we are sitting at a computer or moving just from one room to the next, not getting outside, not getting in nature, not moving our bodies and shifting our energy, things are stuck. And things can get stuck even in our bodies. It might sound woo-woo, but this was a common theme about the importance of even things like yoga. They did humming, triggering our vagus nerve. So this is, I can't go too deep on this, but moving our bodies, Taylor Swift, Shake It Off. I'm shaking my hands for those of you who aren't watching on video, shaking your body to release and just think, oh, I just came from a stressful interaction. I want to have more grace in my next patient exam. Shake it off, move your body, shift, take a walk, get away from the circumstances and be intentional about that movement, because movement can move your energy. And if you're not feeling like you can offer grace and understanding, try some movement. And then what are your ongoing daily habits that you have. For me, I've talked so much about meditation. And when I am needing more grace, I meditate. I make sure I don't leave that off. When I leave meditation out of my life, I don't have much grace, and it's wreaked havoc on my relationships. And I've shared before where I had 2 times where I was arguing with my family all the time. And the one common factor was I hadn't done enough meditation the month before. It really made a difference. So really looking at what's the recipe of your life. And if you're not having the outcome or not being able to offer yourself and others grace, then look at that recipe and see what might be able to be added in or subtracted out.
I love those. I would like to add one that I say a lot is, and I tell myself, is speak to yourself like a friend, because it's so much easier to extend grace and compassion to someone else than it is to extend it to ourselves. So if this is difficult, think always, what would I say to a friend? Or when you listen to that negative self-talk, question yourself, tap into that curiosity that Erin is talking about, and ask yourself, would I ever talk to a friend like that? And what would I say instead? And then just turn it around and tell that to yourself. And even if you don't believe it in the moment, even if your brain wants to fight it, do it anyways, because you're planting the seeds for grace. I love that. This has been so good. I love when we start with definitions, because so often we have this kind of pre-programmed definition, and it's good to just check in and see what is it for you, and love that realistic optimism. I'm gonna use that definitely of why is it so important for us as women in medicine, and I'll review what you said, because it was so different from what we usually hear when we're talking about grace. The things that you told us of curiosity, get support, move our bodies. We don't always think of that when we're thinking about grace and how we deal with stress, and we get rid of that negative energy that blocks that grace and the compassion. And then the daily habits is journaling and meditation. Love, love, love. Erin, one extra thing that comes to mind that adds to what you've said already.
I'm just going to highlight about getting the right support, because, for example, Joanne and I lead group coaching sessions. And when these individuals are in the space with other individuals going through the same thing, and it's like, oh, I'm not the only one suffering with this. I'm not the only one having too much of an edge. What am I missing out on? And so it's that shared understanding. So it's not just get support, but it's getting the right support. And if who's around you isn't the right support, reach out to us and let us know. We've got lots of ideas for that. Getting the right support can make all the difference in the world for not feeling alone, not feeling like this is a you thing, but recognizing, oh, this is an us thing. And that shared understanding can be so beneficial in helping you recognize that there's hope for change, and you've got people who've got your back.
Yes, choose grace. And with that, if you find this very helpful, share it with a friend, and please let us know what else you would like to hear from us. And stay tuned, because our next episode is coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.